The last time I spoke about the coronavirus pandemic, I ended that video by saying that it seemed the world was going to change significantly as a result of all of this. The world would never quite go back to how it was before this began. We would always look back and say there was the pre-coronavirus world and the post-coronavirus world, and the two things were never quite the same. Now, I made that video right back near the beginning of all of this, but as the weeks have begun to tick by, I think some of the potential lasting changes seem to be coming into view now. It's interesting as Christians because the Bible tells us what the world will eventually look like around the time of Jesus' return. So we know the point that we eventually have to get to. And obviously we know where we are today as well. But we don't know the events, the mechanisms, the levers that are going to get us from this place to that place. Now, for many years, we've seen that future world beginning to come over the horizon. We've seen it coming closer over a period of years or decades, even centuries. But it seems like coronavirus may cause a significant leap forward, a significant acceleration towards that prophesied destination in more ways than one. And in this video, we're going to look at 4 of those potential changes. In Revelation, the Bible tells us that people in the end-time world will buy and sell using a mark on their hand or on their forehead. They won't use cash, it'll be a cashless society. This is actually probably one of the most famous prophecies in the Bible. And this is one of those instances where we use cash today, but the Bible says that we're not going to use cash in the end-time world. So how will we get from this point to that point? Well, in truth, this is one of these prophecies that's gradually been coming into view for some time now anyway. Credit and debit cards have gradually been taking over from cash in recent decades, and in 2018, in fact, debit cards overtook cash for the very first time as the most popular form of payment in the United Kingdom. A study in 2019 by Pew Research also suggested that 86% of Americans by that point were only handling cash on a very occasional basis. So again, a world without cash has been getting closer for many years now, and this won't come as a great shock to anyone. However, it does seem like coronavirus is going to accelerate the world even faster in that direction. Headlines like these have become very common in the past few weeks. A lot of analysts are beginning to predict that cash has a very short lifespan ahead of it after coronavirus. ATM operators like Link were already predicting they couldn't survive for another 2 years under the pre-existing conditions. So few people were actually using their machines now, it was just becoming unprofitable for them to operate. But now reports are suggesting that ATMs may not even last for 2 years. Their demise could just be a matter of months away now. It's quite difficult to know how people will actually behave after all this has passed, but 76% of Britons have already indicated they expect to move away from cash permanently from now on because of hygiene and convenience. A lot of businesses are now refusing to handle cash too. You may have seen signs like these going up to that effect. So it seems like this is one prophecy that coronavirus is really accelerating us towards, the cashless society.
Now, we could be just months away from becoming a cashless society due to the pandemic. That's what the former financial ombudsman Natalie Seeney has told the BBC.
Months, not years. The stark warning from the former financial ombudsman Natalie Seeney as COVID-19's grip on the economy sees the pound in our pockets lose its allure. The use of hard cash has been falling for years. In 2008, 60% of all payments in the UK were with cash. 10 years later, that figure stood at just 28%.
The COVID crisis has just escalated a trend we were already seeing in society. But in the review I carried out last year, we predicted that it would be 10 to 15 years before the UK effectively became a cashless society. On current trends, we could be talking months rather than years.
If we read that prophecy again, it says, "He required everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to be given a mark on the right hand or on the forehead, and no one could buy or sell anything without that mark." Now, a couple of years ago on this channel, we looked at a very interesting development on that particular front called the data tattoo. Also known as the e-tattoo or the smart tattoo, this was launched at tech conventions a few years ago and was seen as an exciting vision of what could happen in the future. The idea is that you wear this electronic mark on your skin and it has all kinds of benefits, particularly in regard to healthcare. It can monitor your body for disease, it can monitor blood pressure, heart rate, breathing, body temperature, all kinds of biometrics. And then the idea is that you don't even need to go and see your doctor because they can just bring up your life stats on their computer. Maybe the technology would even alert the hospital as soon as it detected any warning signs. First responders to accidents could scan the tattoo as well and bring up medical history, name, date of birth, the address of the victim, which is of course all important information in knowing how to proceed. The smart tattoo could also be used to make payments, very importantly. It could be used to interact with the Internet of Things, which is coming along with 5G, and it could also be used to track the movements of the wearer. So again, even before coronavirus happened, we could see this kind of technology beginning to come into view. The idea that people could mark their skin in order to participate in the new technological society. And of course to buy and sell, very importantly. However, it seems like coronavirus may accelerate the move towards this technology. In recent weeks, you may have noticed that South Korea has been held up as a model for the rest of the world to follow in response to the pandemic. When coronavirus reached South Korea, they launched an app that would track and trace where infected citizens had been, and this allowed them to act on the data very quickly. If an infected person had gone to the cinema, for example, that cinema was temporarily shut down and it was disinfected, and everyone else who had been in that cinema at that time was then alerted by phone and told to self-isolate. Here's a report on how it works.
Contact tracing is one of the hottest keywords in South Korea at the moment. It tracks the history, timeline, and the locations visited of a coronavirus patient. Amid the fast-spreading coronavirus outbreak, information such as the restaurant and hotel the confirmed patient went to, how they had arrived, which subway line or the number of the bus they took is shown. Even the seat they had sat in at the movie theater is being revealed. This is the movie theater in central Seoul where the fifth confirmed patient visited a day after arriving from Wuhan. In response, the theater closed temporarily and quarantined the area. It reopened on Monday, but still seems quite empty.
Using tracking measures like this meant the South Korean curve has been kept really low, and the whole world has started looking to copy this idea going forward. Here in the UK, a similar tracking app is now being trialled, and it seems like people feel like the benefits of this outweigh the privacy concerns. If it means being kept safe from either this pandemic or indeed future pandemics, it seems like many people are on board with this. I think it won't be long before we see all of this technology beginning to come together. Something you put on your skin that monitors health, that monitors for viruses, that alerts people you've been in contact with, that interacts with the new 5G infrastructure, and that further ends the need for cash. It might take a few years for this to happen, but I think we may look back and see coronavirus as a pivotal moment when all of this kind of technology began to accelerate. Something that I've noticed a lot in recent weeks during coronavirus is how many people have started wearing evil eye pendants or t-shirts or tattoos. Also known as the third eye of witchcraft, the all-seeing eye, the eye of Horus, the eye of Fatima. It's got many names, but it's one of the most ancient, prominent, ubiquitous symbols of the occult. And as I've spoken about in the past, it's also a symbol of a one world order, a one world spirituality, everybody coming together under a single political and spiritual banner. Now, it's easy to get paranoid with this stuff, and I don't want to encourage that. I've seen too many people getting really paranoid about this. But it's interesting that as the pandemic has taken hold, many people, certainly celebrities, have started turning to the evil eye for protection. That's what they've instinctively turned to. They hope that wearing this will keep them safe from the virus. Now again, do I think that all of these celebrities are consciously aware of this meaning? Do I think that all of these people are card-carrying Satan worshippers? No, I don't think that. Many of these will just be doing it because it's fashionable or on trend during the virus. But it's just interesting that as the world both rejects Jesus and moves towards globalism, this is the symbol that is simultaneously being embraced in these days. The Bible says that in the end times, the world will be divided into 10 regions under a global government, and that the whole world will worship an Antichrist figure who will head a global spiritual system. This symbol represents that system. And again, it's interesting that coronavirus seems to be accelerating people towards the embracing of this symbol. They're not turning to Jesus for safety and protection during this time, but rather this ancient occult Antichrist symbol. The final thing that I want to talk about is that coronavirus seems to be accelerating authoritarianism. Many of you will remember when we did the War on Truth series a few years ago, I spoke about how the modern era, which I bracketed as the Enlightenment until 1967, that era was primarily defined by values of the right. Right of centre values took precedence in that time. But in 1967 we had a cultural revolution, the Summer of Love, as it was known, and that began the postmodern era. And the postmodern era has been and will continue to be defined by leftist values. And if you want to explore more about why that is, The War on Truth is available here on YouTube, and I hope that what I'm about to say will still make sense even if you haven't seen that series. But because leftist values are indeed taking precedence in this era, we need to look at far left societies to see what the potential end result of this era could eventually be. Because that is the direction that we are gradually sliding towards as the years go by, we need to look at what the extreme consequence could be. Now, when we look at far left societies, or in other words, communist societies, we see that they are defined by at least three things. They are collectivist, that is the first thing. The right is individualist. The political right believes that human beings are independent of each other with their own hopes and dreams and desires, and they should be free to make their own choices, whatever they may be. The left believes that that's a selfish way to live as an individual and not really thinking about how your decisions impact on other people around you. They believe that each human being is just one component of something much bigger called society, and that as such, each person shouldn't act as an individual agent, but should act in unity with the broader collective. If you go to the extreme left then, those societies erode individual identity altogether. They place such an emphasis on the collective that individuals are kind of dehumanized. This is why in far left cultures a great deal of emphasis is placed on displays like these. There are no individuals here in this scene. There is only the one collective, moving as one organism, one herd. And the further left you go, the more you'll see a shutting down of individual thought, individual speech, individual action, and an insistence that everyone act as one organism with one mind. The left starts off with good intentions about a caring society, but taken to the extreme, the end result is that people aren't treated as individual humans anymore with their own hopes and dreams and desires, but as mere cogs in a big collective machine. So that's the second thing that defines far left societies. They shut down individual freedom of thought and speech and action to focus entirely on the collective. Imagine if one of these dancers started doing their own thing, it would completely ruin the whole show. And of course the far left doesn't want that in their collective. And then thirdly, in order to get all of these cogs in the machine working perfectly in step with each other as one organism, an authoritarian power is needed to control it all. A top-down system is needed to control and choreograph all of these pawns, all of these worker ants, if you like, to make sure that they act in step with one another. So that is the third defining feature of far-left societies. They become very authoritarian to make sure that everyone is thinking and talking and acting in the right way and following the groupthink, following the accepted narrative, following the herd, if you like. And indeed, of course, if any one of these ants were to move out of line, I guess they would be punished quite severely. Now, in the postmodern era, as we've begun this slide to the left, we've seen these things coming into view anyway, even before coronavirus. As we've moved towards collectivism, towards globalism, we've seen authoritarianism on the rise, and we've seen individual freedom of thought and speech being shut down if it doesn't fit with the groupthink, with the accepted narrative, if it's not deemed politically correct. So in recent years, if anyone stepped out of the herd, out of the collective on issues like Islam or gay marriage or transgenderism, they have been shut down and punished for thinking the wrong thoughts and for speaking the wrong words. We've seen this happen. They have been deplatformed on social media. They have lost their jobs. They've been silenced. We've seen this creeping authoritarianism coming into view even before coronavirus. However, it seems like coronavirus is accelerating us further in this direction. We've seen social media companies in recent weeks shutting down freedom of speech in ways that they haven't done before. And to be honest, much of what's been said about coronavirus in the past few weeks has been nonsense on social media. I mean, not all of it, but there has been a lot of nonsense swirling around. But the fact remains that people used to be free to air their nonsense if they wanted to, and now they're not. And that's a really dangerous thing. To silence people just because they're not saying the right words as pre-approved by the government or by the authorities. We also have to watch the tone that is coming from the government in these days. When measures were first announced by the UK government, and I can't speak for other governments, the feeling was very much that they were politely asking us as free citizens for our assistance in social distancing. They presented us with the science and the reasons for it, but they knew that they were making a request of free people. The British people, in response, being decent and honourable and wanting to do the right thing by the nurses, the NHS, their fellow citizens, they agreed to stay inside and social distance of their own free will. And it was an act of free will to come together and make this unified effort. But as time has gone on, there has occasionally crept in a more authoritarian tone. Perhaps this clip might demonstrate.
So it's vital to slow the spread of the disease, because that is the way we reduce the number of people needing hospital treatment at any one time, so we can protect the NHS's ability to cope and save more lives. And that's why we've been asking people to stay at home during this pandemic. And though huge numbers are complying, and I thank you all, the time has now come for us all to do more. From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction.
At first it was just a request for help, but then it became an instruction to be obeyed. And as time has gone on, there's been an increasing shift towards this more authoritarian tone. Not necessarily from the Prime Minister, I've got to say, but from other politicians in the country. There's been talk that the government may need to reimpose lockdowns at various points in the future, effectively putting the people under a kind of house arrest whenever the government sees fit in the coming years. And it's important that we never become comfortable with this kind of language. Whether it was necessary or not to impose lockdown, well, that's another question for another video, but it's important that we never become comfortable with the idea of government imposing restrictions on free people at will. And it's important we don't let the government become comfortable with this idea either. And there's always that risk. Power corrupts. You give that kind of power to the government, they could come to love it just a bit too much. We can't become habituated to the idea that government is a top-down authority that has the power to put free citizens effectively under house arrest whenever they choose. We can't let it become normalised that government has the power to let us out of our houses when it wants, but then shut us all back inside again whenever it wants. That would simply be unacceptable in a free society. And if we become used to this dynamic going forward, there is that concern that we will forever lose sight of what it meant to be truly free and to live in a free society. The government should always be at liberty to ask us for our assistance on such things, and being reasonable people, we should always be willing to listen and look at the data and the science and to take the necessary action, but we mustn't get ourselves to a place where government restrictions on our freedoms becomes the norm. It's also important that any powers the government gave itself during this crisis are also completely repealed in due course. Completely. Nothing left over. And again, if all this doesn't happen, there is a danger that we'll come out the other side of this pandemic forever changed, more subservient and accelerating towards that more authoritarian society in the future. The type of authoritarian society that the Bible says will come about in the end times. I think it's also important to say finally that because we're living in an era defined by leftist values, there is that danger that we're actually embracing authoritarianism right now. I've seen a lot of people in the past few weeks saying to the government, tell me what to do, tell me what to think, don't let me out of lockdown, keep me in my house, keep me safe. When Boris announced that he was easing lockdown this week a few days ago, a lot of people said, no, I don't want that. Keep me in lockdown, keep me safe, tell me what to do. And I think that sets a dangerous precedent for the future. And I think a question we need to ask ourselves in these days is, how much personal freedom are we willing to sacrifice to the government, to the authorities, in order to be kept safe? It might be because I veer to the right of centre a little bit, or it might be because I'm a Scot, but I don't think giving up our freedom is ever a good idea. Either way, I think we have to be careful that this pandemic doesn't accelerate us towards that authoritarian society. Again, the kind that the Bible predicts for the end times.